Xyler stood at the front line, watching the endless waves of enemy ships hurtling toward his fleet. His eyes narrowed as he tightened his grip on the controls of his assault fighter. This battle was supposed to be a decisive victory for his people, the apex predators of the galaxy. Born and bred for war, Xyler was a soldier without equal, trained to crush the weak and claim victory, no matter the cost. His empire thrived on conquest, and he had always been one of its finest tools. His fighters' weapon systems hummed as he flew into the heart of the chaos. The enemy ships, sleek and terrifyingly efficient, swarmed the battlefield. Xyler cut through their ranks, laser fire erupting around him as he dodged and weaved. He barked orders to the squadron under his command, guiding them with the calm precision of a seasoned warrior. This was where he belonged, on the battlefield, amidst the carnage and chaos. Yet, despite his skill, it was clear something was wrong. The enemy's technology was superior, their tactics more precise. For the first time in years, Xyler felt something unsettling in his gut. Doubt. Suddenly, a blast tore through his fighter, sending it spiraling out of control. Xyler fought the controls, but the damage was too severe. His ship tumbled through space, pieces of the hull tearing away. His communication systems flickered with static. One more hit, and he'd be done. Then it came. A direct strike. His world exploded in a flash of blinding light. When Xyler awoke, his vision was blurred. Pain shot through his body, more intense than anything he had ever felt in battle. He was floating in the wreckage of his fighter, half his systems offline, and his body pinned by the shattered cockpit. He tried to move, but his strength was failing him. The internal systems of his armor registered critical damage. He was losing blood, his breathing labored. He called out for aid. His squadron, his empire, someone had to come for him. He had served loyally for years, a proud warrior of his people. This couldn't be the end. But the comms remained silent. Xyler's heart pounded as he accessed the fleet's frequency, desperate for a response. He scanned for friendly signatures, expecting reinforcements, a retrieval team, anything. But all he saw on his visor was a retreating fleet, his people fleeing the battlefield. He blinked in disbelief. No. This couldn't be happening. They wouldn't leave him behind. Not after everything. But as the seconds ticked by, the realization sank in. His people, the empire he had fought for, had abandoned him. Their tactical assessment must have deemed him unsalvageable. To them, he was already dead. Xyler's mind raced, struggling to comprehend. In the cold, logical hierarchy of his species, every warrior had a purpose. And now, his purpose was over. The Empire had no place for those who could no longer fight, no value for the wounded. They were a species that only cherished strength, and he was no longer strong. His heart filled with bitterness, a feeling he had never known. He had given everything to serve, to uphold the honor of his empire. And yet, in his weakest moment, they had discarded him like he was nothing more than a broken tool. His eyes drifted across the debris field, watching the remnants of the battle fade into the distance. There was no one left. He was truly alone. Despair settled over him. There was no rescue mission, no redemption. He was expected to die here, quietly, forgotten. His body would drift until it was swallowed by the void, another casualty in a war that would never remember his name. Xyler gritted his teeth, the pain almost unbearable now. His vision swam, consciousness slipping from him as his body weakened. He tried to fight it, to stay awake, but the darkness was too strong. He had been abandoned. The human ship drifted silently through the wreckage, scanning the debris for any signs of life. Captain Ava Torres sat at the helm, her gaze fixed on the readings. They had come across countless battles like this one, remnants of alien empires clashing far beyond humanity's reach. Earth was a small player in the galactic stage, their presence barely noticed by the more powerful species. But Ava and her crew had a rule: if there was a life to save, they would do it, no matter who or what it was. "Captain, we're picking up something," a crew member said, studying the screen. "Barely there, but it's alive." Ava leaned forward, narrowing her eyes at the faint signal. It was weak, barely detectable. Whoever or whatever it was had little time left. She made the decision in an instant. Prepare the med bay. We're bringing them aboard. The ship moved closer, dodging debris and ruined vessels until the source of the signal came into view, a heavily damaged alien fighter, its pilot trapped inside. As they approached, the gravity of the situation hit them. The being inside was a member of a species notorious for their strength and ruthlessness. Ava's crew exchanged uneasy glances. Helping this alien could put them at risk. Are we really doing this? Someone muttered. Ava's voice was firm. We're not leaving anyone out here to die. Let's move. They retrieved the broken pilot and brought him into the med bay. The figure on the table was enormous, his body wrapped in intricate armor. He looked like he had been through hell. Burns covered his skin, blood seeping from cracks in the armor. The crew worked quickly, stripping away the damaged pieces and stabilizing his condition. The more they revealed, the more they understood. They were dealing with a warrior of immense power. Siler woke to strange voices, foreign and weak. His vision blurred as he tried to move, but pain shot through his body, and he realized he was restrained. His instinct was to fight, to get away, but his body failed him. Through the haze, he saw them, humans. He felt a deep disgust rise in his chest. This was the species that had saved him? These frail, insignificant creatures? The humiliation cut deeper than any wound. His mind raced, trying to comprehend how he had fallen so far. His own people had abandoned him, and now these weaklings thought they could help him. It was an insult. His species viewed humans as little more than background noise, a race barely worth mentioning in the galactic hierarchy. Now, to be at their mercy was unbearable. Siler snarled at them, his voice harsh and guttural in their language. Get away from me, humans! You are not fit to touch a warrior of my kind. Ava raised an eyebrow but didn't flinch. She had dealt with worse attitudes in her time. You're hurt. We're trying to help. I do not need your help. Siler growled, his body tense with rage. Leave me to die with honor, not here, with you. Honor? Ava's tone was calm but firm. Your people abandoned you. They left you for dead. Where's the honor in that? Siler's chest tightened. He had nothing to say to that. The humans weren't wrong. His people had left him to rot in the void, and now, he was stuck here, saved by a species his kind saw as beneath them. He turned his head away, refusing to meet their eyes. You will regret this. I am not your burden. The crew exchanged glances, uneasy but undeterred. Ava's voice softened. Maybe. But we don't leave people behind, even if you think we should. Siler's anger simmered beneath the surface. He didn't understand these humans. Why would they go out of their way to save him, an enemy, a being who would have left them to die without a second thought? Their weakness disgusted him, but it also confused him. His people valued strength above all else. Compassion was a luxury they couldn't afford. He tried to sit up, wincing as the pain shot through his body again. He hated how fragile he felt, how powerless. These humans weren't strong, and yet they had him at their mercy. He lashed out again, not with strength but with words. You're wasting your time. You think this is noble? You think your compassion means anything? Ava crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. Maybe not to you. But it matters to us. Siler scoffed, but the exhaustion was catching up to him. His body ached, his mind reeling. He didn't understand these people, didn't understand why they wouldn't just leave him be. His own kind would have, without a second thought. As the days passed, the humans continued their work, tending to his wounds despite his constant resistance. Siler couldn't fathom why they didn't just give up. Every time he growled or snapped at them, they stood their ground, calmly explaining that they weren't going to stop until he was healed. It infuriated him. They had no reason to help him. His own empire would have considered him dead weight by now. And yet, the humans persisted. Ava checked his readings one morning, noticing his condition had stabilized. You're improving. Siler glared at her, his pride still wounded. I do not need your pity. It's not pity, she replied simply. It's what we do. Despite himself, Xyler was beginning to see something he hadn't expected: strength. Not the kind he was used to, not the brute force or ruthless efficiency of his own people. But there was something unyielding about the humans' persistence, something almost admirable in the way they refused to let him go. It didn't make sense to him. But for the first time, he began to question why. Why had they saved him? Why were they still trying? And why was it starting to matter? Xyler's body slowly mended under the meticulous care of the human crew. Days passed as they worked tirelessly to heal his injuries, replacing fluids, stitching wounds, and monitoring his vital signs with machines that hummed quietly in the background. He could feel his strength returning, albeit at a frustratingly slow pace. But the physical healing was the least of his concerns. What truly gnawed at him was the confusion stirring in his mind. He observed everything with a critical eye. The humans approached their medical duties with precision, but there was more to it than mere efficiency. They seemed invested in his recovery, far more than his own people would have been. Every time they checked his vitals, adjusted his treatment, or cleaned his wounds, there was a sense of care behind their actions, something foreign to Xyler. To his people, injury was a weakness to be discarded, a burden that didn't merit attention. But here, it seemed every injury, every small sign of improvement, mattered. The effort these humans put into saving him was both perplexing and irritating. As his body healed, Xyler's mind remained conflicted. He couldn't understand why they continued. What could they possibly gain by nursing him back to health? He was a warrior, yes, but not their ally. His people would have left a weaker creature like them to die without a second thought. And yet, here they were, continuing day after day. Each act of kindness felt like an affront to his pride. In the quiet hours, Captain Ava would sit with him, her presence non-threatening but persistent. She tried to engage him, ask questions about his people, his life as a warrior. At first, Xyler met her inquiries with silence, his disdain barely concealed. Humans, with their inferior technology and backward ways, had no right to question him. What did they know of war, of true strength? But Ava was patient, and over time, Xyler found himself reluctantly responding. Their conversations were short at first, tense, but they grew longer as the days went by. She spoke of things that seemed trivial to him: loyalty to one's crew, the importance of every life, even those deemed unworthy by others. Her words baffled him. In his world, strength was the only thing that mattered. Weakness was discarded, forgotten. There was no place for sentiment or compassion. Sacrificing oneself for the sake of others was absurd, even dangerous. But Ava didn't see it that way. She spoke of human history, of battles fought not just for survival, but for principles, freedom, justice, protecting the vulnerable. She told him stories of Earth, of people who had given everything for their comrades, their families. Xyler could see the conviction in her eyes as she spoke. It was strange to him, this idea that every life had value. He had never been taught to think that way. He scoffed at her words initially, dismissing them as the foolish ideals of a weak species. But something nagged at him. There was a strength in her belief, a kind of resilience that Xyler couldn't ignore. It wasn't physical strength, but something deeper. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't deny that it existed. One evening, as Xyler lay recovering, a crew member brought him a small tray of food. He looked at the simple meal, rations, hardly fit for a warrior of his stature. Yet, the gesture was there. The human smiled awkwardly and left without a word, leaving Xyler alone with his thoughts. For a moment, he considered refusing it, rejecting the offering out of pride. But something stopped him. He picked up the tray and ate. Small gestures like that began to pile up. A passing comment from a crew member asking how he was healing, a few extra minutes spent adjusting his bedding to make him more comfortable, a quiet smile from Ava when she checked in on him. These were things Xyler had never experienced before. In his world, comfort was a luxury reserved for the uninjured, the victorious. Here, it was given without question. Slowly, almost against his will, he started to change. He still didn't understand why these humans cared so much, but he could see that they did. They weren't like his people, who valued only strength and discarded anything that wasn't useful. These humans believed in something more, something that Xyler had never been taught to value. There was a moment, quiet and unremarkable, when Xyler realized something had shifted inside him. He found himself watching the crew as they worked, noticing the way they interacted with each other. They were not bound by fear or the threat of punishment, as his people were. Instead, they worked together, helping one another with tasks, sharing stories, even laughing. It was strange to see such unity, not based on dominance or hierarchy, but on something else, something softer, but no less powerful. For the first time, Xyler began to question the beliefs he had been raised with. His people had always valued power above all else. Compassion, loyalty, even friendship were seen as weaknesses that would drag a warrior down. But here, on this small, fragile human ship, he saw strength in those very things. It made him wonder if, perhaps, his people had been wrong. The alarms blared throughout the human ship, cutting through the calm. Captain Ava's voice crackled over the intercom, ordering the crew to battle stations. Xyler, now fully mobile and healed, rose from his makeshift bed, his senses immediately alert. He could feel it in the air, the tension, the urgency. Something was coming. He made his way to the bridge, where the crew was working frantically. Their screens were filled with the unmistakable silhouette of Kraglock ships, massive, jagged vessels that seemed to swallow the stars themselves. Xyler's chest tightened as he recognized the enemy. The Kraglock were a scourge, even feared by his own people. They were brutal, relentless, and nearly unstoppable. Many elite warriors had fallen to their cruel tactics, and their arrival here was no coincidence. Xyler's gaze shifted to the human crew. These fragile beings, with their outdated technology and lack of combat experience, stood little chance against a force like the Kraglock. And yet they moved with quiet determination, calmly preparing for the inevitable conflict. They knew their odds, Xyler could see it in their eyes, but there was no hesitation. No fear. The ship's shields were activated, and weapons systems powered up. Ava barked commands, her voice steady despite the looming threat. The crew followed her orders without question, working together seamlessly. Xyler couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration. His own kind would have calculated the odds and, deeming survival unlikely, would have left. But these humans refused to abandon their post. Even with death at their doorstep, they stood firm, preparing to defend themselves and their ship. "Captain," Xyler said, his voice low, "you cannot defeat the Kraglock. Your technology is insufficient. You must flee." Ava glanced at him, her expression hardening. "We're not running. Not from this." Xyler was taken aback by her defiance. "You don't understand what you're up against. The Kraglock are far beyond your capabilities." Ava stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. "We've faced impossible odds before. We don't run. Not from anyone, and certainly not from them." Xyler was silent for a moment, processing her words. These humans were nothing like his people. They didn't retreat when the situation became dire. They didn't abandon their wounded or sacrifice the weak for the sake of survival. They stayed. They fought, even when logic dictated that the battle was already lost. The ship shuddered as the Kraglock opened fire. The humans scrambled to defend themselves, firing back with everything they had, though Xyler knew it wouldn't be enough. The Kraglock's weapons were devastating, capable of tearing through the ship's shields in minutes. And yet Ava and her crew fought on, refusing to yield. Xyler stood at the edge of the bridge, watching them. He could leave. He was fully healed now, strong enough to take an escape pod and flee to safety. It was what his people would expect of him, self-preservation above all else. In his world, staying to fight with this doomed crew would be seen as a foolish waste of his strength. But something held him back. These humans, as frail and insignificant as they seemed, had shown him a kind of strength he had never known. They had saved him, healed him, even when they had nothing to gain from it. They had risked their lives for him, a stranger, an alien who had given them nothing in return. They had taught him that loyalty wasn't born out of duty or fear, but out of respect, out of something deeper. And now, watching them prepare to face certain death, Xyler felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him. Loyalty. Not to his empire, but to them. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. He could leave, and no one would blame him. But for the first time in his life, he didn't want to run. He didn't want to leave them behind. These humans had earned his respect, not through force, but through their unwavering courage and compassion. Xyler made his decision. He stepped forward, his voice carrying over the chaos. "I will fight with you." Ava turned, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Are you sure?" Xyler nodded. "I have seen many battles. I know the Kraglock, and I know how to fight them. If you are willing to stand against them, so will I." The bridge fell silent for a moment. Ava's gaze softened, a brief moment of understanding passing between them. She nodded once. "Then let's do this together." Xyler moved to the weapons station, his massive hands swiftly adjusting the controls. He had been trained for moments like this: war, destruction, survival. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't fighting for glory or honor. He wasn't fighting for his empire. He was fighting for them. As the Kraglock ships loomed closer, Xyler prepared for the battle ahead. For the first time in his life, he felt something beyond duty driving him. It wasn't about proving his strength. It wasn't about survival. It was about standing with those who had given him a reason to fight.